Our speaker is Czernysz, a master's degree student from the University of Gdańsk, Poland. Today, she presents her talk on the topic, Myths of Love in Contemporary Nordic Teenage Series, A Tale That Lives On.
Hello, my name is Czernysz, and I'm a master's degree student at the University of Gdańsk in Poland at the Institute of Cultural Studies. And I would like to present you my study, which is my bachelor's thesis, written in 2024, and its topic are Myths of Love in Contemporary Nordic Teenage Series, A Tale That Lives On. And moving on to the aim of the study. It is to prove that the classical myths of love are present and identifiable in contemporary Nordic teenage series. And the method I choose to achieve this is a comparative research, where I compare, interpret, and analyze three specifically chosen pairs of classical stories, which are myths, and TV series. I specifically chose contemporary Nordic teenage series for my analysis because the Nordic countries were the main area of my bachelor studies, and in recent years, these series have been gaining popularity worldwide, presenting teenagers and adolescents in the most realistic way possible. And moving on to key theories of my research. To quickly summarize them, intertextuality is an interaction of text within one text, a pretext. Pretexts carry their specific sense, which combines itself with all the influences from different texts, and, in the final product, it presents a new, integrated, and transformed sense to its recipient. However, this interaction does not have to be neither an intentional nor a conscious act of the author. Next is the structural definition of a myth by Claude Lévi-Strauss. And a myth in a structural sense is not dependent on language, culture, and society from which it originates. Its meaning passes on to another variant of this myth, while staying clear to the next recipient. Attention should be paid to the connections that characterize the semantic elements of the myth, because ultimately, these connections are crucial for the final reception of the myth as a myth. That makes the myth in the structural sense resistant to distortions that come with translation into other languages, cultures, times, or media. Thanks to the transfer of semantic connections, recipients with different experiences are able to identify the same myth. Going further in my conclusions, I can say that they can identify it even in other works, which indicates its important role as a pretext. And lastly, we have the literary definition of a myth by John Holloway. And the myth, in a literary sense, points at the mutual interpenetration of elements and the intertwining of the whole and its parts. The literary definition of myth also implies looking at myth as a possibility of telling a specific story. A story repeatedly told and transformed in myth can therefore crystallize in the form of a specific work. Holloway cites the example of the mythical King Lear and Shakespeare's drama King Lear. So, more importantly, what is a myth of love? One of the pioneering works in the area of myths of love is Love in the Western World, and from 1939, and Myths of Love from 1961 by Denis de Rougemont. It was the main inspiration behind this thesis. And to this day, these remain the most important and fundamental works on the topic. So the myth of love in this, my particular study, is to be understood as a combination of the theories listed in the last slide, and most importantly, Denis de Rougemont's definition of a myth of love. And many cultures use myths to process the most important concepts in human life, and their popularity still lasts because myths help writers understand the world surrounding them and to determine their own identity. Love, for example, is one of the most basic elements of world and identity because every concept of a human is a concept of love. Even though love in various works is presented in different, seemingly new ways, particular meanings that have been present there for centuries exist in it too, still. As Denis de Rougemont says, most of the myths functioning in our lives have been expressed before us. Undoubtedly, many myths, which are dominant now, will only be expressed later. According to that, myths of love are an important factor in creating new, seemingly new, love stories, which are not in fact new. They are only more or less conscious interpretations of a myth that has been transformed multiple times. Because when a myth becomes a pretext, its meaning transforms. However, the links, which connect distinctive elements of a myth, stay the same. That is what makes their identification possible. It is, however, a task for the reader, who captures allusions, deciphers them, and places them in their original context. That is why myths have a crucial impact on society and love. If people weren't so attached to them, they wouldn't be the ones they are, and they wouldn't love the same way as they love, and their passions would stay misunderstood. Even though no person neither was nor will be a particular hero of a given myth. Moving on to the most important part of my study, the analytical part. We have the first pair, the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, in the first season of Lose-It. And this myth is one of the best known tragic stories of love in history. And Lose-It is a Finnish youth series that premiered in 2020. And season 3 concentrates on Kasper, a high school senior, and his relationship with Sandra, which takes a turn for worse when she cheats on him. The first thing that comes to mind when thinking of Orpheus and Eurydice is a snake. That is why it is worth looking at its symbolism. It symbolizes death and betrayal, yet rebirth as well. In the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, the snake plays a key role because it is the direct cause of the woman's death. The snake in Lose-It is betrayal, which is the direct cause of the end of the relationship and the process of love's death. Similarly to how in the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, the snake is the cause of a real death, Eurydice's life's end. However, in Lose-It, it doesn't end there because Casper's coming-of-age journey brings him maturity and a new start. He learns that he has to let go of his love for Sandra because it cannot be saved. The contrast of the meanings of the snake comes to mind in this case. Where in Lose-It the positive one is visible, meaning rebirth and transformation. It is therefore worth noting that in this case, death does not always mean something bad, and its meaning changes with the course of events. In Orpheus and Eurydice, the first death, that of Eurydice, is a tragic event that breaks Orpheus, but at the same time makes him able to do everything to save their love. Similarly, when Sandra betrays Casper, he gets angry, breaks down, but ultimately is not ready to give up and decides to fight for his love. In the end, both male characters find peace and happiness. Orpheus comes back to Hades and is reunited with his beloved, while Casper comes back on the cruise ship to Tallinn, free from the burden of unhappy relationship and ready for adulthood. In the case of Lose-It, the connections between the individual elements of the myth and the series are not obvious, but the key element is the comparison of death to the breakdown of a relationship. The most important elements of the myth are art, love, and death, while the series only presents one of them in the literal sense, which is love, and death takes place in it only in a symbolic sense. Therefore, as can be seen, the common motives are the fight for love and the tragedy of this love, which are in the foreground in both works. And next, we have Myth of Eros and Psyche and the first season of Scam, which premiered in 2016. Coming from Roman mythology, the love of Eros and Psyche is turbulent, but with devotion and determination, it concludes in a happy marriage. The first season of Scam concentrates on Isaac, a Norwegian high schooler, and his struggles with Evan, and the feelings they share. I have juxtaposed these two works because they share a key motive for both of them, namely discovering the true face of the beloved, which also acts as climax in both of them. The act of discovery in the myth was presented literally when Psyche sees her husband's face for the first time and recognizes him as the god Eros. In the series Scam, on the other hand, the recognition does not concern the physical, but the mental side of the partner, and the culmination takes place in the 8th episode, when Evan has a manic episode and his ex-girlfriend makes Isaac realize that Evan is really sick. Despite significant difficulties, both Psyche and Isaac bravely search for their missing partners, which is evidence of their loyalty and devotion. This determination turns out to be one of the factors that determine the happy ending. In both of the stories compared, in the end, there are characters in the world who support the people who discover, and above all, their love, trying to make it possible for it to be fulfilled. This help and the affirmation and determination of the characters lead to the triumph of their love and the formation of a stable, successful relationship. Additionally, Hans Biedermann in the Lexicon of Symbols states that Eros is shown in ancient myths as a beautiful young man who at first causes his beloved many worries, but in the end gives her complete happiness. Here, one can compare the curses and advantages of Eros's divine state to Evan's illness and special beauty. Both are young men of extraordinary beauty, but neither can fully enjoy their advantages in love, because the former has to deal with his mother and the latter with the hardships of living with bipolar disorder. Ultimately, however, these difficulties give way to sincere devotion and feeling, when Eros saves Psyche and marries her, and Evan learns to live for Isaac minute by minute. Nevertheless, the first season of Scam, both in the plot and even symbolic layer, visibly uses and transforms the myth of Eros and Psyche, situating it in the realities of a contemporary story about homosexual love between two Norwegian teenagers. Last but not least, The Legend of Tristan and Isolde and Season 1 and 2 of Young Royals, which premiered in 2021 and 2022. The most important element connecting the series with this myth is primarily the social barrier that stands in the way of passionate love. Tristan and Isolde have to fight family ties, the customs of the society of the time, and loyalty to the king, while two students of a private Swedish high school, Simon and Crown Prince Wilhelm, are bound by the controversial homosexual nature of the relationship and the expectations of society and the government towards Prince Wilhelm. Developing the issue of passionate love and the difficulties it brings to those engulfed by it, Denis de Rougemont emphasizes the inseparable connection of this love and society, which creates necessary limitations, even in modern times. In the series Young Royals, one of such limitations is institutional homophobia. Researchers also quarrel over whether the love of Tristan and Isolde was coincidence or fate. However, much points to the prevailing action of fate in Young Royals as well. In the midst of love, de Rougemont explains that one loves rather than passion itself, uh, than the inaccessible object of feelings. This results from the fact that this state of soul, which is passionate love, exists earlier, attributed to the ideal object of feelings, before it is identified with a real person, as a result of an inevitable error, that is, fate. Just as Tristan and Isolde drank a love potion that brought them lust, terrible pleasure, endless torment and death, so Vedle and Simon looked at each other, and this look had the same effect as the love potion, but in a less literal sense. We can therefore assume that the name love potion or look conceals passionate love, which fate brings to the heroes at a chosen, or even one might say, ideal moment. We can thus notice here the motive of slaves of love, whose feelings do not stem from opposition to society, but from fate, given to them independently of their will. Despite the helplessness in the face of fate, the chosen ones must suffer. Suffering is also caused by the presence of the monarchy and the opposition to its duties. In both cases, however, this opposition does not result from rebellion, but from the conflict between the interests of the monarchy and the feelings of the protagonists, in this case Tristan and Wilhelm. However, there are differences in both stories, especially in their endings. Here we can see the contrast of these endings. The recipient of the legend of Tristan and Isolde expects a happy ending, which he does not receive, while in Young Royals, the viewer, convinced of a tragic end, receives a positive ending. As can be seen, the legend of Tristan and Isolde and Young Royals are connected by a network of connections, many of which are strongly transformed, while others remain more legible. The most important of them is definitely the connection between passionate love and society, which is the core of both stories. And finally, the conclusions. Since love is a necessary and fundamental element in human life, it is inevitable that subsequent generations of creators will produce stories on this subject, and consequently repeat and transform in this process already known myths about love, because also in accordance with intertextuality, it is impossible to create an autonomous, not yet invented story of love. Therefore, it was impossible to avoid this influence also in the free discussed series. The conclusions of the study are as follows. The study proves that a comparative analysis of pairs of classical myths and contemporary stories using the myths of love is an effective method of identifying the patterns of depiction of love in media. The myths of love are certainly present in contemporary Nordic teenage series, which presents an opportunity to study the relevance of classical myths of love and their ability to enrich and deepen the analysis of other works. So, thank you very much. Kiitos paljon.